Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Trustee Dan McLean, Chair of the Finance, Budget, and Enrollment Committee. Today is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome committee members, trustees, staff, and members of the public. At this time, I ask all who are able to please stand for the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Miigwech. May be seated. The next item is the approval of the agenda. Tonight we have two notices of motion added to tonight's blue folder. One is a notice of motion from Trustee Earhart, seconded by Trustee DeVitis. Trustee Earhart's not with us yet, is she? Trustee DeVitis, did you want to speak briefly to this?
No, I think. No need.
Okay. And the second motion is a motion for Trustee DeVitis and myself. Did you want to speak to that?
We can move along.
Okay. And the last change is that we will be making an adjustment to the agenda. We're adding an item at 5.5, which is an oral staff update regarding capital priorities. So I need a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended.
Trustee Rajwani.
Thank you.
Trustee Wong.
Moved by Trustee Rajwani, seconded by Trustee Wong. Thank you. All in favor, please just raise your hands or orally, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, that passes. We'll move to the declarations of possible conflict of interest. Trustees have had an opportunity to review the agenda and recommendations. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Hearing and seeing none, we will move to item 4, which is delegations. Delegations allow the public to address committees of the board and are designed to ensure that the members of the public can provide information and perspectives to trustees as we navigate the decision-making process. Delegates are reminded that they are to provide input in a respectful and constructive manner and should not engage in any behavior contrary to the board's code of conduct, human rights policy, or delegations procedures. We have one delegate tonight, Mr. Travis from the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. Did you want to sit at the table, sir?
Before I start, can I deliver petitions to the chair?
I'm sorry?
Can I deliver these petitions to you before I start?
Certainly. Thank you, sir. Just proceed. Mr. Travis, you have you have exactly 5 minutes to present your delegation. You will hear a bell ring when you approach the end of your time. Trustees may ask questions of clarification following your delegation as well. Each trustee will have approximately 3 minutes to do that. And we ask you to please stay until that opportunity is. So, Mr. Travis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Stanley Travis. I'm a teacher with the TDSB, and I'm speaking today as the co-chair of the Communications and Political Action Committee for OSSTF Toronto, representing 6,000 teachers and support staff across the TDSB. Our schools are in crisis. You know it, I know it, educators, support staff, students, we all know it. Staff shortages, overcrowded classrooms, and dwindling resources are stretching our system to its limits. Educators are working harder than ever, but too often they do so without the tools, support, or stability they need. In many schools, students go without a stable teacher for weeks, months, sometimes an entire semester. More and more students require all types of support: individualized support, learning accommodations, mental health resources, and English language instruction. Yet the resources simply aren't there. Teachers are pulled from their prep periods to cover unfilled absences. Occasional teachers are placed in long-term positions for which they have no qualifications, only because there is no other option. Instead of focusing on teaching, many educators are often forced to spend their time managing disruptions and handling complex behavioral issues. We see the consequences reflected in the rising levels of violence that teachers now face. And even when students are ready to engage, they are sometimes held back by outdated technology, by a lack of essential learning tools, by classrooms in disrepair, unventilated rooms that are either freezing or sweltering, lead pipes, asbestos in walls, leaky roofs, flooded hallways. We all know very well about these problems. I only started as an occasional teacher in 2022, but I've already seen this crisis firsthand. I've stepped into classrooms where students have no stable teacher for the entire semester. The shortage is so severe that I've even stepped into courses like photography, comtech, and cooking, subjects I'm not even qualified to teach because no qualified teacher could be found. I've been in classrooms where the very lack of basic AV hindered instruction, and students, despite their eagerness to learn, were unable to complete assignments to their fullest capacity due to a lack of functioning computers and necessary software. I've taught a history class to ESL students, ranging from level A to level E, some with complex behavioral and learning difficulties, many struggling without the supports and resources they need. I faced classrooms where liaising with student success, communicating with admin, and handling behavioral disruptions took up more time than actual teaching. And these are just my experiences alone. This is not sustainable. It is no surprise that so many educators are leaving the profession and that even fewer are entering it. Teachers and staff are increasingly exhausted, overwhelmed, and burnt out. If we don't address these challenges now, this crisis will only deepen. And that's why I'm here today. I presented a petition with over 1,000 signatures from TDSB staff, urging you to pass a motion calling on the province to provide the funding our schools desperately need. At its core, this crisis is about funding. Without proper investment, we cannot address the critical shortages of staff, resources, and student supports. We can't repair our deteriorating schools. No policy change, directive, or memorandum will solve these problems without the funding to back it up. And with an Ontario election on the horizon, this is a critical moment. This is when school boards, trustees, educators, and communities can come together to demand real investment in our schools. We must use this opportunity to push candidates and elected officials to commit to meaningful change. And as trustees, you have the platform to make that case. And we know that many of you already have. We recognize and appreciate the work you've done to advocate for our students. So today, we're asking you to pass this motion, continue speaking out, and make it undeniably clear the status quo is not sustainable and our students deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do I have any questions, trustees? Trustee Laskin?
The rec.
Sure. So the petition I submitted has the motion written. We, the undersigned, call upon the TDSB to pass a motion to call upon the Government of Ontario to immediately, 1, increase annual government investments in public education to ensure Ontario's schools can provide the best opportunities for education and student growth. 2, provide immediate and dedicated funding to address the growing backlog of school repairs and maintenance needed to ensure every school is a safe and healthy environment to learn and work. And 3, end the recruitment and retention crisis to ensure that every student has the teachers and education workers they need to support the success each and every day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you have any? Okay. Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Dawson, you have the floor.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you so much for your delegation. I wonder, could you please email the delegates' address a copy of the petition and the motion? I mean, not necessarily with all the signatures and everything, just the content of it, the text.
So you're asking that, so staff, we can send the, once we've got it, and we will make sure that all trustees have access to the petition and the motion contained within.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing nothing further, Trustee DeVitis.
Thank you. Um, so these are things that the school board in the past has asked for in different ways. There's a motion that Trustee Erhard, for example, moved that's asking for funding that's very specific in terms of a very particular cut. What do you think the public out there, the public perception of what's happening in our school is? Do you feel that people understand the shortages that we have in our schools?
The public you're referring to, I think it's pretty clear to many. We hear from parents all the time who worry about their students, their kids, not getting the quality of education that they need, the one-on-one supports that they need, worried about bullying and violence. I think the public is aware that there is an education crisis and it's getting worse, and we've seen since the pandemic especially, things get much worse. But there's not enough pressure right now. This is probably the worst the education system has been in for decades, and more pressure needs to be ramped up from all of us, from trustees, from the public, from teachers, parents, everyone, to tell the government that we need adequate funding.
Okay, thank you. That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee DeDutis. Trustee Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you, and through the chair, I just want to thank the delegate, Mr. Trivas, for your delegation and the incredible advocacy. I guess my question is, in addition to the request of the board to make this motion, like to continue our advocacy and make the motion and the asks that you've petitioned for. 1,000 signatures. Have folks also directed their advocacy and added their advocacy directly to the province, to the ministry, to the government in a similar way?
Yes, and I could speak only a little bit for the OSSTF, but we're not just focusing on trustees. Of course, we have to engage the entire public, and we are campaigning. We are targeting elected officials. There's an election right now, and our plan is to go as hard as we can to engage teachers and educators and the communities around us to pressure all the candidates to make this a priority for the election. So by passing this motion, this is just one of many ways we want to ramp up the pressure against the provincial government.
Thank you. And through the chair, again, thank you so much for the delegation. The advocacy is much appreciated. And thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Williams. Before we proceed, I wanted to thank Trustee DeDutis for agreeing to co-chair tonight. And on that note, I'm going to pass the chair to you, please.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I notice in the petition, number one, you to pass a motion to call upon the government of Ontario to immediately, and number one is to increase annual government investments in public education. Are there specific areas that you and the OSSTF believe are of greater need than others, or?
Again, I'm just one teacher speaking here on behalf of the OSSTF. I wouldn't call myself an expert on all the different types of programming and areas that need specific funding, so I can't really comment on specific areas. This is a very general motion to increase funding. We've seen funding go down by almost $1,500 per student since 2018. So we know that in general, per student, we just need a lot more funding. We need funds to hire more teachers, to hire more support staff, especially educational assistants, counselors, and social workers, with the ultimate goal of reducing class sizes and making it easier for teachers to deliver an excellent learning experience for all the students. So there are many ways that funding can be used, but we know that funding needs to go everywhere. We need to repair our schools, we need to hire more, we need more programming, there's all sorts of things. So I can't lay out specifics, but this is, in general, we need more funding.
Thank you, sir. And with that, I'll conclude and take back the chair.
I'll pass it back.
Thank you, sir. We thank you, Mr. Travis, for your time and your delegation.
Thank you so much.
That's more applause I've gotten in here in this room in 6 years. We will now pivot to 5.1, contract awards of operations. Our staff report for consideration today is 5.1, contract awards. On page 1 of the agenda, Appendix A is to be for receipt and Appendix B is for committee approval. It's my understanding that Executive Officer Schneider, you're going to lead this discussion?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm happy to do that as Anita is away today. So as you just said, Appendix A only has one contract for information and Appendix B has one contract for committee approval. And tonight there are no contracts in Appendix C for board approval. Happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you. Do we have any trustees online or in the room? Trustee Laskin, the floor is yours.
Sorry, it's on another contract. It's on the next one. Oh, no, it's on this one. On the recruitment of 5 Indigenous professionals for the Urban Indigenous Center, and this was the Pathways Executive Firm contract starting now. Are these teachers? What professionals is one looking for?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe these are for central principals to support the program primarily.
Principals meaning educators?
Yes, for the chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Any other trustees online? Sorry, Interim Director Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair. And I just wanted to comment about that contract in particular. This does coincide with the motion that came forward from the UIEC, and therefore this is what they were asking for. So I just wanted to make sure that trustees are aware of the tie-in between the two. We were being asked to look at this simultaneously. Staff was going through the process anyways. So this contract coming forward fulfills the intent of the UIEC motion that was at board last week.
Okay, thank you. And seeing no further points of inquiry, I need a motion, and Appendix A is for receipt and Appendix B is for approval. Can I have a mover or seconder, please?
Trustee Patel.
Thank you, Trustee Patel, and welcome. And Trustee DeVitas will second. Can we open the vote, please?
Shan in favor.
Wong in favor.
Trustee Patel, how do you vote?
I'm in favor, Chair.
Thank you. And that passes 7-0. Thank you. We will move on to section 5.2, which is contract awards facilities. On page 9 of the agenda, Appendix A is to be for receipt and information, and Appendix B and Appendix C are for approval. Executive Officer Schneider.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, tonight there are 11 contracts in Appendix A for information. There's 4 in Appendix B, and there is 10 in Appendix C. We would ask that item 22 be pulled back as we would like to do additional work on that contract. It'll come to a future EPEC. So we would ask the approved Appendix C less item 22.
Thank you. And is there an approximate date that we can expect to see that return?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we would likely see that come back to the March report, but if it's more urgent, we may come back to the special ed back on February 27th. But it'll be before the end of March for sure.
Okay, thank you. Do any trustees have any questions about these items? Trustee DeVitis?
Yeah, just a quick question. There's an item in there, I think it's 13. And there is a question someone had about what it is that we're replacing, what it is that we're doing. Are we putting in a new cold room in there?
I think that's agenda page 13, but I think it's item 2.
Okay, sorry, excuse me. Thank you.
Sorry, my.
Thank you. And through the chair, I assure you, we are not putting back a coal room. It's called a coal room because of the age of the building. We do not use coal anymore in our schools. So it is used primarily as storage, and it is in poor condition, and we need to address the leaks.
I want to make a joke about where I'm going to store my wine, but I'll find a new place for it.
Okay, thank you.
And seeing no other questions in the room or online, any trustees online? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder. Again, agenda A is for receipt. Agenda B and C are for approval. Trustee DeVitis will move. I need a seconder, please.
Wong.
Thank you, Trustee Wong. We'll open the vote, please.
Shan in favor.
Wong in favor.
In favor.
And that passes 7-0. Thank you. The next item is 5.3, the first quarter interim financial report for 24-25. It's on page 23 of the agenda. This report is for receipt. Executive Officer Schneider.
Thank you and good evening, trustees. So this is the first quarter report for the period ending November 30th of this year. It's an early look at our financial position, and I'm pleased to report this is still in a balance as we reported in the revised estimates at the last FBEC. There are some important points to be raised, though, within this document. There are assumptions and risks that we know can impact any forecast and any budget. And on page 24, we identify some of those risks. The first being around enrollment. We have seen from the September to the October, we've seen some changes there, as well as we are seeing a decrease in international students. As the October 31st enrollments are complete now, we expect the only risk now is to the March enrollments, what attrition happens in year, but we expect it to be the typical levels that we see. The next is around supply costs, as we reported to you at our revised estimates time. Of the $10.5 million target for reduction in supply costs, we have achieved 6.8 at this point in time. We continue to monitor this, and depending on the results for the balance of the year, it's another area that is important to keep an eye on. The next one is around inflationary pressures. And as we know with the political environment, both south of the border, that there could be significant changes to our cost structure. We continue to monitor that, and we'll report if we see any inflation above what our projections that were in the budget are anticipated. And then the other one that we say is all other changes, and primarily this is around our interest income. And again, the volatility in the financial markets impacts by both the international as well as the American and Canadian markets. But we will continue to monitor any other changes outside of that. There are 3 appendixes for your information, and I'll briefly go through those. The first is these are the ministries templates that we use. The first one is they call the dashboard, and it provides you 3 key pieces of information. The first As you can see in section A is our projection, and you'll see at the very bottom, we're still at a 0, so we are in line with our budget forecast. In the B section, you'll see the changes in enrollment, which reflect both day students of the board that are funded as well as our international students. And then Appendix C, or Section C, I should say, shows the change in staffing. Appendix B is our revenue detail. There's really 4 big things I'll point out here. One is you'll notice in both note 1 and note 6, note 1, when we created the budget for you, we didn't have all the details around inflationary increases and the funding benchmarks. And there was a labor provision put by the ministry, which has now been encompassed in the projection in all the various areas it has to be. We also have seen additional funding of grant announcements of $7 million in what I refer to as PPFs, or it's called something else now, as well as we brought some Bill 124 revenue into this year as well. The decrease in international students, you'll see there, is impacting us by approximately $3.8 million, as we are seeing decreased enrollment because of the immigration patterns changing by the provincial government. In interest revenue, we are still seeing a good flow of interest revenue. Again, we're monitoring that as the changes in the marketplace, and we are seeing some additional cash flow from other sources as well. And then the last is deferred capital contribution. This is the way under PSAB that the ministry has us bring the revenue for capital projects at the same rate that the amortization is done. And so the change in forecast just represents that amortization rate. On Appendix C is the expenditure analysis under the ministry categories. And you'll see under notes 1 and 2, really this is around that labor provision now floating through all the different expense categories now that we have firm information on labor agreements in Bill 124. So that information has now been floated in the various lines of the report. In note 3, we're looking at the textbooks and computers, and we're seeing, as typically we have seen in the past, expenditure patterns are higher at the beginning of the year as schools stock their schools, and we expect them to come in line by the end of the year, but the pattern is always ahead of what you'd expect as a 10-month division of the budget. And then we do see a cost pressure in our facilities department of about $9 million due to the cost of supplies and services and contractual fees to maintain our buildings. And then the last one is, again, the labor provision that was initially put down in the non-operating line has been flowed up through all the other lines of the report. So through you, Mr. Chair, we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Trustee Laskin.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. Things are on track. I don't know what that means in terms of our bottom line budget, because there was no actual figure in here on whether or not the deficit's going to remain the same, whether or not the 3-year plan has to change. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out the bottom line in terms of if things are on track, we anticipate the deficit that we planned for 24-25 to remain that stable. Is that what on track means? To you, Mr. Chair, I might have missed it, with apologies, but I just try to get a handle on where we're at in our budget.
So through you, Mr. Chair, as we reported at the revised estimates, those changes that still brought us to 0, you'll see on page 27 under section A that we're still at 0. We're showing not an worsening. We're still within our budget projections for this year.
Okay, so again, for clarity, being at 0 means it's using the POD, it's using everything else. So it's the planned budget deficit that the plan was, because we were in a deficit, there are ways to still balance. That hasn't changed. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, for clarity, yes, that through you, we are in a balanced position where using a POD and our other revenues equal our expenditures.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because these are public documents, I think it might be helpful if included in these documents could be a little more detail as to what that means in terms of the approved forecast deficit that we're covering off by blah, blah, blah remains or something, like the bottom line. So they don't think we're at zero, meaning yay, everything's fine. We have no more problem. Which if you don't know anything about our budget, you could assume. So I would really appreciate just that little more detail or context in reports going forward. Thank you through you, Mr.
Staff
Chair,
able
to
to
staff.
make a modification to that so that it will reflect.
Going forward, I'm not worried. I don't think you have to change this one for board, but I'm just thinking.
Is there not
it's-
an opportunity to modify some just additional background information by the time the matter becomes public at board?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'd be happy to do a modification to the cover report for this to have that. So when it gets to board, it's there.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Rajwani.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you to staff for that report. And thank you for bringing the risk to our attention. I'm curious, since we're just at the beginning, how are staff and what are the strategies to mitigate some of those risks that may be coming, as particularly as it relates to enrollment? Thank you.
So through you, Chair, the enrollment, I would say, is a very small risk. We always have to note it because that is your significant amount of funding. So it's important that we don't not explain it, but I would say the risk is minimal on the enrollment side due to the fact that really the October enrollments are complete. We're just verifying the descendants of the ministry. And the March, our planning department's usually very good in the what I'll call the attrition of some students, especially in the secondary panel between the October count and March. So the risk on the enrollment is small, but it is there, and it's a significant cost should it be way off. The supply cost, I'm happy to report that we got 6.8 in our forecast right now, and People of Culture continue to work on programs to support our staff. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we may see an improvement from there. The one that I think is the most challenging is inflationary pressures with the uncertainty that we're hearing and we're all hearing in the media. That's very hard to estimate. We've been talking with our bankers around what to do with our investments to ensure that we maximize as best we can our interest income. And then we also obviously are watching with our suppliers with interest what happens around possible U.S. actions that impact our cost structure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Rajwani. I'm going to pass the chair to Trustee DeVitis.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Due to the announcements of the federal government as it pertains to international students, does the Provincial Ministry of Education still apply an admin fee?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, they still are doing their a fee structure.
And can you refresh my memory as to how much that is per student in terms of either percentage or?
Through you, Chair, I don't have that with me tonight. We can get that for you, though.
Thank you. And can I draw your attention to agenda page 30? I have just a couple of these numbers stuck out to me. At the bottom, the non-operating, our expenses are down 66.5% in other non-operating expenses. A, I'm curious to what that is. And B, I'm interested in whatever we're doing, we could do it some more.
Unfortunately not. If you look at note 5 for that, this was where the instructions from the ministry, because there was uncertainty about the labor agreements that were coming forward that impacted 25, 26. So they asked boards to put in that non-operating the labor provision. So that number has been moved up now to all the different categories where the labor costs are being incurred. So it really isn't found money. It's just now posting it to the right places. The ministry asked us to keep it in that line until there was confirmation on the labors.
Sorry, I asked.
That's all right.
And then the other is around computers. I noticed it's up 42.2%. Is that simply what you described briefly about the beginning of the year, the expenditures at the beginning of the year are usually a higher percentage of and that will work, we expect it to work its way out to more recognize the projection by the year's end?
Yes, through you, Chair, that's correct. Both classroom supplies and computers typically see a bulge at the beginning of the year because schools are buying, whether it be classroom supplies or some technology, as well as we're investing in technology at the beginning of the year. So you'll see that bulge and it should taper out and come within line.
And through the chair, just a reminder, last year we had a little bit of a reprieve from the one-to-one devices because of the timing. We were purchasing a year in advance and we didn't last year, so we actually caught up. So in 23-24, that $9 million expense related to one-to-one wasn't in our budget last year, but is in our budget this year. Or
Okay.
in our actual costs, sorry.
Thank you. Last chance for anybody online. And seeing and hearing none, I need this item is for receipt. I need a mover and a seconder, please.
Trustee Earhart will move.
Trustee Earhart will move.
Trustee Patel.
Trustee Patel will second. Thank you both very much. Can you open the vote?
Shan in favor. Shan in favor.
Wong in favor.
Trustee Earhart, you were kind enough to move.
Yes, apologies, I'm in favor.
Thank you. And that passes 7-0. We'll move on to item 5.4, which is our 3-year enrollment projections for 25-26 through till 27-28, which is on page 31 of the agenda. This item is for receipt. Interim Systems Officer Castaldo, you'll lead this discussion, I understand.
Can everybody hear me? Good. All right. Thank you and good evening, everybody. I'm joined by Nahama Hertzberg, our Manager of Accommodation Planning, who is online. So through the chair, what we are presenting this evening is another annual report. We provide this to FBEC each school year for receipt. And this is an update on our projected enrollment, specifically our 3-year enrollment projection for the elementary and secondary panels, as well as our system totals. These enrollment projections, they are updated every year. They're updated based on the most recent enrollment trends and demographic factors. And these projections are used for budget development, staffing allocation, and they're also reported to the Ministry of Education. The tables in the report that can be found on page 32 of your agenda package, they lay out our projected enrollment for next year, as well as the following 2 years. These enrollment values, they are our average daily enrollment, our ADE, and that's the average of our full-time equivalent enrollments that are collected on October 31st and March 31st of every year. In this year, we have taken a more conservative approach with our enrollment projections, and as such, we are projecting a slight decline next year and for the following 2 years. And this is due mainly to recent federal announcements on lower immigration targets for 2025, 2026, and 2027. Those high rates of immigration that we have experienced over the past few years, that is a reason that we have grown in our system. And without those large numbers of newcomers, we likely would have experienced a decline over the past few years. And now with the reduced targets coming forward, that is what we are expecting to see. So starting with the elementary panel, we're projecting a slight decline for the next school year from 164,076 students this year to 163,163 students next year. So that's a decline of 913 elementary students, which amounts to just over 0.5%. And just to highlight some of the assumptions that went into the development of that projection, they include stable retention rates. So really no change in terms of the relationship of the number of students in a grade moving on to the next grade the following year. We have a lower level of newcomers than what was observed over the past few years. Our JK enrollment will remain lower than pre-pandemic levels, and that's due to fewer preschool age children in the city of Toronto. And we have large grade 8 cohorts that are graduating from our elementary panel being replaced by those smaller incoming cohorts of junior kindergarten students. So at the secondary panel for next year, we're also projecting a slight decline from 73,125 students to 72,648. So that's a decline of 477 students and equivalent to about 0.65 of 1%. And some of the assumptions that went into the development of the secondary projection include stable retention rates, similar to the elementary panel, and also a lower level of newcomers to Canada. And we also have large grade 8 cohorts leaving the elementary panel and entering the secondary panel at grade 9. So in total, we are projecting that our system enrollment will decline by 1,390 students next year, and that's equivalent to 0.59 of 1%. And we are projecting declines in 2026 and 2027 of 1,628 students in 2026 and just over 1,000 students in 2027. And these declines are really at the elementary panel. We're projecting that the secondary panel is going to essentially remain stable during that time period. The elementary panel is projected to decline because we do have fewer JK students entering our system. And at the same time, we have large graduating cohorts of grade 8s replacing them. And without that offset of large numbers of newcomers, that natural demographic shift will start to have a greater impact. The secondary panel, it's going to continue to benefit from those large grade 8 cohorts moving on to grade 9, and that's going to help to stabilize enrollment and offset any declines there, at least in the near term. So that concludes the presentation. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. Thank you very much for the report and for taking a more conservative slant, because since our funding is so directly tied to our enrollment, I would rather be more conservative as opposed to ambitious and not meet those targets. Regarding our international students, that used to be a source of revenue for us. And with the change in the federal policy, are we already noticing any changes in terms of students leaving the system or anticipated students not coming for semester 2? Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can't comment about semester 2, but if you do go back to page 27 of your agenda, you'll see that other pupils is down 47 to our projection initially, and secondary is down 177. I don't have a split for secondary between first and second semester, but that's the ADE difference for the year for us in international students.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. When we did our 3-year budget deficit plan, does this enrollment projection affect that in terms of year 3 going out in terms of anticipated decline? Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as part of our process, as we start to build the projection for you for 25-26, we will look at this. As trustees are aware, depending on how many students less we are in projections and where they are, it may impact teacher staffing, for example, maybe offsets, but it won't be 100% offset. So we'll have to adjust our projections based on what our international students departments are forecasting for the upcoming year.
And can I just add, sorry, through the chair, the calculation of the fees was always intended to be cost recovery. So although we say that it's revenue generating because we see the revenue very clearly, we don't necessarily see the costs because we don't allocate them to each specific, to, say an ESL instructor or other costs associated with a student. So it is intended to mirror the costs that we receive per student. The other thing that I'll say is from what we hear from our senior manager of international education is that this year we are seeing an impact of elementary students specifically, where the elementary students may have their visas approved, but the work visas of the parents are not necessarily being approved. So usually for younger students, the parents would come with them under a separate visa. And because they aren't receiving those visas, then the elementary students can't come even though they actually have received the visa. So it's having even the quotas that are being implemented for next year are being impacted by other factors to do with the number of visas that are being provided that you wouldn't necessarily think impact education, but are having a direct impact on the number of students that are coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Maybe more of that will come out when we talk about at the next meeting, the actual notice of motion that's here tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. I see no further questions online. Any trustees? Hearing and seeing none. Again, this is a report for receipt. I need a mover and seconder, please.
Trustee Patel can move. Chan can second.
Trustee Patel will move. Trustee Shan will second. Thank you, gentlemen. Will you please open the vote?
Chan in favor.
Patel in favor.
Trustee Wong, can you please share how you vote? Trustee Wong? Can we please mark Trustee Wong absent for this portion and close the vote, please? And that passes 6-0. We'll move on to the next item, which is 5.5. We're going to hear an oral update from staff regarding the recently announced capital priorities by the Ministry of Education. Interim Director Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair. So trustees may be aware that the ministry has released the details of its investment related to the capital priority submissions that were, the business cases were submitted in fall of 2024. And so these are the announcements related to those business cases. The news release from the ministry indicated that it was an investment provincially of 1.3 billion, which included 30 new schools and 15 additions. Unfortunately, TDSB did not receive any of its submitted business cases, so we are not part of the 30 new schools or the 15 additions. And just as a reminder, we did submit 5 projects, 770 Don Mills Road, which is a new JK to 8 school. It's a podium school in a mixed-use development. Kapapamachakwe Wandering Spirits. We were asking for additional funding to support the rebuilding, I guess, of the Wandering Spirit School. It's a JK to 12 school. We had initially received funding a number of years ago, but that funding is not enough to build this school. So we were asking to increase to the current benchmarks, plus some additional funding for specific rooms, which would be expected in an Indigenous school. St. Margaret's Public School was a replacement JK to 8 school to address accommodation and facility condition issues. And as a reminder to trustees, that was a very innovative proposal where we indicated that we would sell some of the property and thought that through TLC reviewing this, they thought it would be a good opportunity for long-term care housing or anything really that the province has with regards to housing, whether it's affordable housing for that particular property, that it would make sense there. The fourth was Secord Public School, which was a replacement JK to 5 school to address accommodation and facility condition issues. And then the fifth was Davisville Junior Public School, in addition, to address accommodation issues. So again, we did not receive any funding for these projects. And the ministry did actually provide feedback related to each project. For 1770 Don Mills, the ministry is supportive of the board continuing the discussions with the city. It was important for us to receive this confirmation as we would need to be in these discussions right now in order for the planning to happen. It's challenging in rural areas or in less urban areas when population increases and there's a new subdivision, for example, being created. When they do the planning at that time, there's land set aside for schools. So it's not a conversation, I mean, it's a conversation that they have, but we don't need ministry permission. We don't need to plan for that school with a commitment from the ministry, but the land is set aside. This is exactly the same thing. We're setting aside quote unquote land for future construction. But when we set that aside, we need a commitment, a financial commitment in order to be able to be part of those plans, because if all of a sudden we weren't able to get the financing for that school, then the developer would have to completely change what they are building. So it really is important for us to have a strong commitment from the ministry that we will be able to move forward there. And that's why it was our #1 priority, because it was time sensitive. So we are hoping that the ministry's letter that they sent will be enough for the city to continue their conversations with us. And we are working with ministry staff just to make sure that it is a strongly enough worded, even if there isn't a financial commitment attached. For Kapapawachakwe Wandering Spirit, the ministry, what they said to us was, you've already got funding for this school, so this isn't the process, even though I believe we were provided that instruction earlier on to do it through capital priorities. So now they're telling us to do it outside of capital priorities, and that we would ask for additional funding through a separate request. So we will work with them to determine the appropriate process that we should follow in order to address that. So again, it wasn't a no, it was, this is not the appropriate place, and we will try to work with them. For the other two, it really comes down to most of the projects that were approved across the province relate to accommodation issues. So there's growth in an area and they needed additional space in order to accommodate students. So the feedback that we received is that the project doesn't meet necessarily those requirements, but we were wanting to address facility condition. And there is nothing right now that the board has available to it to address facility condition when there's significant work required. I would liken it to being a homeowner and doing the cost. Is it better to keep putting money into your home, or would it be better to move or to rebuild? So that to me, there is a threshold that we reach, right? Where if it's going to cost us more to actually continue to address the facility condition needs in the existing building rather than to build a new school, then that's the threshold that we believe that we have met in order for us to be able to not waste, to be fiscally responsible. So we believe it's fiscally responsible for us, and that it would be cheaper, especially in the long run, to be able to rebuild this school rather than to continue to upgrade the school. And if you've been to St. Margaret's in particular, most of the learning is happening in portables. So it's a porta pack that is become a permanent addition to the school. And we would really like for those students to be able to have the learning space which they deserve. The last Davisville Public School, although the project does meet the utilization metrics, so we do need additional space. The ministry's response was that there had to be considered along with all of the other just to, before we turn it back to trustees for questions, it's really disappointing for staff. It is challenging to address some of the renewal needs the significant renewal needs that we have in the board without being able to have replacement schools. And this goes along with the moratorium on school closures, because we have many schools that would be part of accommodation reviews where we would be able to reduce our deferred maintenance backlog by being able to close schools and address maybe 3 schools through the new building. And so the moratorium is impacting our board significantly. That's one way. The other way is that when they look at overall spaces across the board, they're seeing that we have accommodation needs in one school, but then they're looking and saying, well, you have some space in another school. But we know the geography of Toronto just doesn't allow for that in most cases, especially we have neighborhoods that are growing that need accommodation. And then we have neighborhoods where we would be looking at potential closures. And so it would be impossible, given traffic, given locations, in order for us to be able to address accommodation needs by moving to schools that have space. So just to put that out there as well. Also, when we look at the number of students, Toronto Catholic did not receive any projects either. So the City of Toronto did not receive any capital priority projects through this round. So $1.3 billion invested, approximately 20% of the population of the province in Toronto, and not one project. So just that's some information for trustees as we have this discussion. And thank you. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Trustee Laskin, we have a number of speakers on the list. We have Trustee Laskin, Trustee Arts, Trustee Earhart, Trustee DeVitas. We'll begin with Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and appreciate staff providing us with some of the ministry feedback. On Davisville, of course, you know, they do have portables on site. They can't fit anymore. So maybe the ministry has to educate itself. Sorry, rhetorical comment. Your comments need to be in a letter in response, in my opinion, through you, Mr. Chair, for the director to consider responding to the fact that the TDSB received no approvals of the 45 projects that were approved across the province. Basically, everything you said, and I know it's been said on our website, it's been said in many other ways, but I think I would appreciate consideration of breaking it down. These were our 5 priorities. This is what you said. This is why, and the need. Confirm, blah, 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 and move on. Go through all these 5, and then general comment about the fact that the moratorium and the comments that you made. I know we've made this time and time again, but it should be said again. And there's some timeliness to this because we are in an election, but the public deserves to understand. They make a big splashy announcement about 1 blah, blah billion for schools. There's no like asterisks that said in Toronto got nothing. So I would really appreciate, it's not a political, it's responding in a public way to confirm your understanding as staff, to confirm your understanding for the rationale of why my time's been stopped for some reason. Sorry, I was just conscious of that with the other speakers. Yeah, it should be carrying on. Just to be aware. And then lastly, it's time for us to say that because the province ignores the needs in the City of Toronto, we have no other opportunity, but I would apply for exemptions to begin a park process and a school consolidation process in a minimum of 5 or 6 areas that are in the long-term plan. And I would make a point of saying, therefore, because we cannot count on you, even though our need is great, and we have responded to your request, and these are in line with your projects, we will plan to do the following using our proceeds of disposition and continue to work with the city to use our school grounds, use wording from the Toronto Lands Corporation in terms of community assets by making innovative, creative projects that cost the government little money because you're not putting any money into our schools anyway. That's my rant. But I do think one of my schools has already asked me about, did we get any money? And I responded, I shared the ministry press release that listed all the projects that were approved. Interesting enough, it's interesting to map them over a political map and just see how many areas got multiple projects and what the likelihood of the political representative will be in those ridings. It's completely transparent this round, and I think it needs to be called out. So, Mr. Chair, I have ranted enough, but I really hope through you that the staff will consider a respond that's on our website so that we can at least let our constituents know there's a huge issue with the way schools are funded, and we will never get out of it unless some attention is being paid. And it's not our staff's fault. Their business cases are impeccable. They meet the criteria. They work hard. They, what else can I say? It's just not being taken seriously, the needs of the students in the city of Toronto. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Arts.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Everything Trustee Laskin said, plus I do remember to the director's comment that we were told in the last round to apply for funding for Kapapa Magic Way through the Capital Priorities Project. So their response this time is both disingenuous and angering that they have ignored this project that's so critical to our system, or that, angering that, the left hand is not talking to the right hand in the ministry, and that's not okay. I am very disappointed to see Seaport is in my ward, and I'm very disappointed. Seaport, like St. Margaret's, has had a porta pack forever, and has additional portables this year. The whole yard is taken up. We are redirecting students away from Seaport. I don't know what the redirection looks like for St. Margaret's. We are directing students to the other schools in the area, but everything in the area in East York did not build schools on land. They do not take portables. We have the schools that we're redirecting students to are at or approaching capacity. They don't have space for a whole bunch more schools. It's a development area, and there's no portables available on those sites. So put more portables there. It's a false narrative. And I'm very frustrated. St. Margaret's really was a beautiful proposal, and the community really deserved to have that, a new school for them. And I'm deeply disappointed. My question is, so on the accommodation reviews and the ability, Worth of Pine Ridge was just granted an exception to the moratorium on school closures. So that was just announced this week. People can go back to the OBSPA update and find the criteria for that. But the ministry made an exception for a particular school. It has specific conditions, but the important part, they made an exception. So this was not like us. This was not a school that burned down and then, and it has to, something has to be fixed and be replaced and it has to be reviewed. This is something that the ministry looked at and they decided to grant an exemption for that case. So they can do this. They can grant us exceptions based on the large number of schools and our need to right size. They can grant exceptions to all the boards. I know from talking to school boards across the province and especially in the north that the school closure moratorium hurts everybody. It hurts all school boards. There's school boards with, two schools in a small community where the population has decreased. Both schools are in terrible disrepair and they can't consolidate them. And so because they can't consolidate them, they can never apply for a new school, and they can't properly maintain them. And it hurts their bottom, it hurts their budget, it hurts their students. So my question is, how are we going to use this new exception to essentially get our own exception in this case? How could we use this? Like the moratorium is not a moratorium, they grant exceptions. So how are we going to be able to use this?
Through the chair, I can take a crack at this. The exception that was made for the school board that you're speaking of, it had to do with safety and the school being on a highway, and so they were able to build their case to create that exception. So I think it would be our responsibility to build the case for specific pupil accommodation reviews rather than a general, we need them. I think that would be the strategy that would be required in order for us to get those exceptions, to provide the rationale. And not that we haven't, and not that I don't believe that the staff at the ministry understand the need. I just think that the exception was provided because of very specific rationale. And so I think that it's incumbent on us to provide the same.
Okay, thank you. I'm ready to support whatever direction we want to go in as a board. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Yards. Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much through the chair. And thank you to the other trustees for their comments and questions. I share the frustration with this update and the approach that has been taken by the ministry and the government. I did want to just seek clarification around Kapapamachakwe School, because my recollection is precisely what Trustee Art said, is that it had been recommended that it go through this process and now we're being sent back to the other process. Could we get some clarification on what the ministry shared with us, and have there been any discussions with the ministry to elaborate on what they shared? Thank you.
Through the chair, so the information that's provided there, let me just, sorry, I'll read out exactly what they said. Give me a second. They said that as this request is associated with a previously approved project, the scope change request will be assessed separately through the in-year process. So staff is unaware of what the in-year process is, I would say. There is no specific process. So we just got this information, and we actually had a meeting scheduled today with ministry staff that got canceled to have those discussions. So we haven't had the opportunity to discuss with ministry staff yet what our next steps would be. But we certainly do intend to follow up and to follow whatever process we're directed through.
Okay, thanks very much. And through the chair, it would be appreciated if we could get some information on how we, like, to the best of our knowledge, what is the public information and the information shared with our board on how the capital funding decisions are prioritized by the ministry and this government, just to have a sense. I mean, I similarly looked at the map, and but I found myself wondering what is being made publicly available around how the applications are assessed. Thank you.
Thank you. So through the chair, they do, when they ask for the submissions, provide some criteria as to how they will be evaluated, and that is public. The letter that we received back letting us know, I think, is directly related. We haven't received this information previously in writing. I think it's directly related to one of the Auditor General recommendations for the ministry, that they provide school boards with detailed written feedback on funding decisions to help them understand why projects were not approved. That is part of one of the recommendations that the Auditor General provided. So we did receive feedback, as I indicated through the presentation. We can look at how we share that publicly so that people are aware. I am unaware of the projects that were approved, what the rationale was there compared to, and why those projects were, what the difference between those projects and our projects are, through the chair.
Okay, thanks very much. And through the chair, was there anything else changed from this year versus previous years in terms of how the decisions are communicated to us? Like, for example, previous years, would they have a meeting with all school boards or all school boards of a region to offer the opportunity for discussion with the ministry? And was that process for communicating the decisions different this year? Thank you.
Through the chair, I wouldn't say that the way that it's communicated was different. I would say that my experience in the last 15 years is that as we received confirmation of projects, that boards received them at different times, and that there was a communications embargo that was attached to them, and usually the ministry would make the announcements in different boards at different times. And the difference for me in this process is that it was all released at the exact same time. And when we inquired, can we share this information, we were told there was no embargo. So coincidentally, there is an election that could be part of the rationale, just wanting to get the information out as quickly as possible. So that would be the only real difference, other than receiving the written feedback on each of the projects.
Okay, thank you very much. And just wondering if this year and if previous years, if there had been any discussion around what had been said in the update here around particularly St. Margaret's and the cost to renovate versus cost to build new, and that once we get past a point that it would present savings to government to build new versus maintain state of good repair. And does the ministry provide boards with any process to provide that kind of assessment of potential cost savings to government for taking decisions to replace? Thank you.
Through the chair, I'm going to start, and then I may turn it over to Executive Officer Pachetti and System Planning Officer Castaldo. The way that the ministry looks at the renewal needs of a school, they use the Facility Condition Index, and they do their inspections, I think, on a 5-year basis. And so the number that they use for that only would really look at the renovations or the renewal requirements over a certain period, whether it's a 5-year period or a 10-year period. And I believe what they use is 5 years for the purposes of looking at this calculation. So for us, when we look at what are the renewal needs of the school, we're looking at it on a little bit longer term basis, because, you know, something maybe have to be replaced in 6 years. And so there is an impact with the way that the ministry is calculating the renewal needs of the specific school compared to the cost of the building, when you're only looking at the repairs that need to take place over 5 years versus the actual condition of the building. So I will ask Executive Officer Pachetti if there's anything that she would like to add.
Thank you very much through the chair, and just following up on Interim Director Zucker's point. So when we submit our business case, and every school board can submit their top 5 schools, and they submit a detailed business case. This is, of course, one of the key points that we highlight in the business case. Not only the deferred maintenance backlog value of the school, but we also point out things like whether the school is accessible, whether the school has mechanical ventilation, whether the school has teaching spaces that meet the highest standards for student achievement. Even what the site looks like. All of these things go into the business case. Now, there's no valuation matrix that we are asked to add to our reports for those sorts of things. Everything is very much looked at from a facility condition point of view. What is challenging with St. Margaret is that, in fact, a significant amount of the classrooms at St. Margaret are, in fact, portables that are attached to a central corridor. So even the value of that building is challenging because it's doesn't meet typical ministry school standards, given that half of the classrooms are older portables attached to a central corridor. I don't know if there's anything else I can add, but I would say that if you are interested, the business case is on our website. It's quite a detailed business case. I think we present a lot of information in those business cases that speak to why these are important projects to undertake. I'll turn it over to Acting System Officer Castaldo.
Sure. Thanks, Maya. And through the chair, just one last piece to add. In addition to the written business case where we outline the rationale for the projects and highlight the accommodation challenges and the facility challenges and all of the associated information, there's also an Excel business case. And in that Excel business case, the ministry does have a metric. It's called the net present value, or NPV. And basically what that boils down to is the estimated cost of the project versus the estimated savings that would be achieved. And as you've heard, the challenge with St. Margaret is that the FCI of that school, the renewal backlog, sits at about $5.5 million. And that doesn't necessarily reflect all of the issues with that facility or the issues with those portables. But the cost to replace St. Margaret is upwards of $28 to $30 million. Which it greatly exceeds what would be achieved in savings. And that also takes into account the operating costs of the school and other factors. But what this really boils down to is the one-to-one replacement scenarios and business cases are never going to be supported because what the ministry is looking for is a positive NPV. So what you are saving by replacing the school is greater than what it costs to replace that school. And the only way to achieve a positive NPV would be to close and consolidate 3 schools into one, because you're eliminating the renewal backlog and operating costs of 3 schools and consolidating that into one build. That may generate a positive NPV, but when you're looking at a straight one-to-one replacement, the cost of constructing in the city of Toronto right now versus what the FCI and the deferred maintenance is for a school like St. Margaret, you're just never going to get there. And that's one of the reasons that we're challenged with this particular business case. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That's extremely helpful. And just to make sure I understand, a consolidation as was described that would get the MPV sort of into a space for the ministry would not be possible under current regulation due to moratorium. Is that correct? Through the
Through the
chair?
chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. So we're boxed in on all sides, and thank you for just reconfirming that to me in this way. I had one more question, and it was around the rationale provided for C-Cord. Trustee Arts provided so much helpful context, and so thank you, Trustee Arts. What I heard was that it did not meet the utilization metrics and that there are other accommodation options available, and it was described, but I just wanted to clarify that the ministry did not provide what the accommodation options were that it felt were available. Is that correct?
Through the chair, what we know at this point is what they've written in the letter, so we haven't yet had an opportunity to explore what ideas they have. But I will add that C-Cord is close to 140% utilized with 15 portables on site and approximately 850 students. So it is a tremendous pressure for us. We did indicate in the business case measures that we have taken and that this board has taken to address some of the available capacity in the area. Specifically a boundary change that was approved last year with Crescent Town Elementary School. So that is a means of using available capacity in the area. In April of this year, we're also bringing forward a report recommending the redirection of residential developments in the attendance area of C-Cord because, as you've heard, we cannot add more portables to that site. We are essentially at the carrying capacities of that property. So we're looking to implement other measures to mitigate further growth at C-Cord, and that was also indicated in the business case. So absent of those two accommodation solutions that I've described, I'm unaware of what other options the ministry sees. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. I too, as an East Ender, fail to see clearly reasonable options that would be available. And I'm wondering if at this time, if it could be shared where we're thinking redirections around what the distance would be for those. Assuming that's what the ministry must think within the system, but I can't even see what redirections are feasible at this time. Is there anything that can be shared? And thank you.
Thanks. And through the chair, we are looking at local options for those redirections, but none of the schools nearby can accommodate all of the proposed development in the C-Cord area, which is trending towards 8,000 units. We would be looking at somewhat of a piecemeal scenario where some developments may be assigned to a school, but others to a different school. So that creates a very challenging scenario in that we may be necessitating transportation to multiple schools within a very small geography. But again, those recommendations are going to be brought forward in April once everything is finalized. But only to say that sites in the area are small. We don't have many opportunities. There may be one or two, but again, these are schools that are 85 to 90% utilized. And by making these kind of changes, we are at risk of adding more portables to school sites that are already constrained, which is something that we would like to avoid. If there are other opportunities, they are much farther afield, which would most certainly require transportation. And that's not something that we are recommending at this time. But again, we would look forward to more conversations with the ministry to understand what they see. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm trying to keep my language diplomatic because my frustration is not directed to anyone who is in this meeting. And so I really appreciate the responses to all the questions. And it is so disappointing, particularly since the needs are so great province-wide, but the needs are very unique in Canada's largest city. And so it's just incredibly disappointing that there are no school or public childcare projects through this capital funding either. And so it's deeply disappointing. And thank you all trustees for your questions.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Trustee Didivitis.
Thank you. So a lot of the questions and comments I had, we already said, and for the sake of time, I didn't want to rehash all of it. I think it's important for the board, for a chair, the director, to communicate with the Ministry of Education and the public to respond to their announcement, the funding announcement. So I wanted to explore with the committee, different avenues to do that. We could always let this report go and pull it. But because there's no written report and so on, I thought what we could do is have an open-ended motion to allow the chair and staff to figure out what the best way for that to be. There's the board meeting's 2-3 weeks away, right? So if I were to move a motion, if folks think this makes sense, it would be that the chair and director work to develop a plan to communicate with the Ministry of Education to respond to the funding announcement. So it's open-ended. If that works for everyone, I think the chair is still on the call, and they may want to respond to that if that makes sense for them. But I would also be curious to know what the chair of the committee wants to do.
Thank you, and I'll wander into this first. A business arising motion has to come, if I understand it correctly, after the matter is resolved? Like after we hear the report, do we have the business arising motion? Or can we have it in the middle and still continue the list? So it goes on the floor, we deal with it, and then we can continue with the speakers list? Okay, we're going to take a very brief recess for 3 minutes. We'll reconvene at 6:05. Apologize for the inconvenience and for those online. So we hope to reconvene we will reconvene at 6:05. Thank you. Does anybody know what we do with a petition? Like, I did that part. What do we do with it after? Thank you. It's 6:05, so we're going to begin to resume. First, we're going to have to confirm quorum. We'll do a brief little roll call. Obviously, Trustee DeVitas and I are in the room. Trustee Earhart, are you available online?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Trustee Patel. Trustee Shen, are you
I'm
with
here,
us?
Chair.
Thank you. Trustee Vajwani.
I'm here.
Trustee Wong. My count gets us to 5. We're good?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll go live. So we are formally back in session. What we are going to do is we are going to continue with our speakers list. And at the end of the process with the speakers list, we will deal with the motion, the business arising motion from Trustee DeVitas, who will need a seconder ultimately. But we will have that discussion after we have run the speakers list. So Trustee DeVitas, you are still on the clock, sir.
We can continue. I'll just move the motion when it's my time.
Thank you. Trustee Patel.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm disappointed while I'm not surprised. We all know why this type of moves happens. My only question is there any way OPSPA can help us in communication, or is this battle just belongs to TDSB?
Belongs to TDSB.
Sorry, who's the question directed to?
Yeah, like I just want to hear from staff that is there any way OPSPA can, what I call is help us in communication, right? Like how unfair this is, especially for TDSB.
Trustee Patel, I'm not sure it's fair to staff to ask them to speak, but we do have, we are fortunate to have some people in attendance today who represent us on OPSPA.
He's a director of OPSPA, Mr. Chair.
Sorry?
Trustee Patel is a director of OPSPA.
All right. Yeah, and it was just shared, Trustee Patel, that you were one of the directors.
I'm one of the director, but how can OPSPA help us out? I can be a director. I can speak on behalf of myself, but I cannot speak on behalf of OPSPA. So how, as a staff or collectively, TDSB and OPSPA can talk about this issue?
OPSPA's trustees.
Yeah, OPSPA is not a function of staff. It is not. It is a federation for the trustees to help us learn each other, to learn from each other successes and failures, to help to advocate collectively. But staff wouldn't have any direct role in that, and it's a little awkward to ask them to speak on OPSPA's behalf.
I see. All right. That's the only question I had. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to pass the chair because we're through the first and we're about to go to the second. So before we go to the second time through, I'm going to pass the chair to Trustee DeVitas.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you. Executive Officer Pichetti, you had a really nice phrase, and I wish I'd have known it was coming because I'd have written it down. And you had described in classrooms that were of optimal configuration and preparedness to facilitate optimal learning. Do you want to share that phrase with us again?
Thank you through the chair. I'm not sure I can remember the exact word, but the sentiment is that we look at our classrooms. Some of them are 30, 40, 50 years old, 60 years old, to look at what is the optimal design of those classrooms to deliver strong teaching outcomes that meet 21st century learning needs. That you're not teaching science in a room that was designed 45 years ago, for example, or any of the other programs that we have. So that's the sentiment behind that sentence, and wish I could remember what I said.
No, that was great. That was great. Thank you. I thank you for that. Until that end, given that some of our buildings were built over a century ago and many, many, many decades and decades ago. And you're our facilities expert in the board. I'm willing to take your off-the-top anecdotal response to how many rooms, what percentage of the rooms in our system meet the aspirational thoughts that you just shared with us?
Thank you. And through the chair, well, I would say that you are looking at schools that have been built from the mid 90s onward. So when we get an opportunity, of course, to build a new school, that is when we, challenge ourselves to see with our, teaching and learning and academic peers, what is the best way to deliver learning for this program in this space? How do we ensure that we're not only building classrooms that suit today, but suit the future? And so I would say that's the kind of thinking that's been in place for quite some time. But going back to the mid 90s, perhaps, is where you'll start to see really good examples of that in the portfolio. I think Interim Director Zucker has something to add to that too.
Yeah, I just want to say that's the intention, part of the intention behind the capital revitalization strategy. And one of the things that we're looking at are secondary and elementary design standards. And then we would be able to compare our existing inventory of schools to those design standards. So then we can actually respond to that question with a true percentage. But I don't think we would, because we don't have specific standards that we would expect all of our, for example, science classrooms to look like or have those specific components. And once we do that, we will be able to provide that exact information, and that will be able to help us to determine the projects that are required in all of our schools.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Just out of curiosity, when the ministry tells us that they'd like to come and make an announcement of our one of their new programs at one of our schools, is it possible for us to suggest that they do it at St. Margaret's? Is that part of the equation when we have that discussion and they'd like to use us as a diving board for their promotion of their investments into the school system? Do we get to invite them as to where in the system they make that from?
Through the chair, we can take that away. We usually work with the ministry to determine where they go, or they do have specific requests in some instances.
Thank you. This government's been in for 6+ years. How many years has the wandering school application been on our list of capital projects to be done?
Through the chair, it was 2019, and we did receive capital priorities funding in 2019. We received 11.5 million, but that is not sufficient to build an Indigenous K-12 school. And we have been trying since then to receive more funding. And this year, what we asked in our capital priority submission was to at least increase the funding to meet today's current funding benchmark for a new school. And the response we received is not that they didn't want to consider it through capital priorities, but rather in year, which we're not quite sure how that would work. Would it mean that we submit for additional funding as we proceed with the design?
Thank you. And there was some mention of some previous advice from the ministry as it pertains to this school and this project. And did the previous response we got from the ministry come in writing? Like, so if, are we able to share our confusion based on their varied responses as to how we find ourselves in this somewhat unique and awkward position?
Through the chair, this is actually the first year in quite some time that we've actually received any kind of written comment about our capital submissions. In the past few years, and I was just checking with System Officer Castaldo, I think in the last 5 years or so, it's really been us having meetings with the ministry staff to understand their evaluation of our capital priority submission. This is the first time we've had it in writing.
Okay, thank you. St. Margaret, how many years has that been on the list?
We're just checking. Since 2018.
2018. I assume things are improving since 2018. That was just.
No.
I want to go back a little bit to this MPV, not that I understood all of that, but this whole notion that this equation that the only way that we can meet the standard and meet that philosophy work as if we close schools and amalgamate and make that work, except, you know, we've asked repeatedly about regarding the moratorium, we've asked for the potential exemptions. Is this really this, there's no way to get to this without the ability to close schools, and they won't even talk about the ability for us to close schools. So there's no mechanism to deal with any of this.
Through the chair, as I've said, to achieve a positive MPV, we'd have to have a school with a substantially high backlog of renewal as recorded in the deferred maintenance and the FCI. And when compared against the cost to construct a new school in the city of Toronto, in most cases, we're not going to get there in terms of looking at the priorities that we have, which are really established around dealing with our most urgent accommodation pressures while taking into account other factors like the Porta Pack at St. Margaret, like the facility condition there, like the equity issues. So it'll be really challenging for us to identify one-to-one replacements that meet that threshold.
Sorry, through the chair, I just want to add to, for St. Margaret specifically, when we look at the business case that we were submitting, one of the things that needs to be taken into account is the proceeds of disposition that we would have received based on the proposal that we had put in. And I don't think that currently the mechanism that the ministry uses to evaluate the proposal would have taken that into account. It's unusual, and TDSB is in a unique situation where sometimes our land, depending on the area, has value, and we are able to use some of it in order to invest back into the school. That's not usually how proceeds of disposition works, and so that's why it would have to take some innovative thinking in order for that to be considered as in the business case as a whole.
Okay, thank you. I always find it challenging that we'll get reports around we have student accommodation issues in an abundance of places throughout the city, and cranes everywhere and plans everywhere. And we have a repair backlog that is growing at a rate faster than the government provides us money for. And yet we have proceeds, we have a section of money that we can allocate sometimes to subsidize some of the projects, but they don't approve any projects. So it's not even conceivable that we could put that money to work The only thing that we've been able to do that is in the last couple of years, operational, and nobody wants that. Like, everybody loses their mind when we do that. So to that end, I know that we've talked about it and I know we've made inquiries. Can staff update us as to where conversations lie or where it lies with our requests to have greater use of our capital resources to be able to act independently and do, extensive repair or, build Wandering Spirit School or do repairs. Yeah, you should. I'm running out of time, but you get the idea.
So thank you, and through the chair. So when we use proceeds of, or the intention when the regulation changed for proceeds of disposition was it needed to be used the same way that we use our school condition improvement grants. So it's a replacement of things. And so anything that's new doesn't qualify for a use of proceeds of disposition, and therefore we need to request permission from the ministry. So that's where the change in regulation has had an impact on us. Before, when we sold properties, we were able to use the proceeds in order to invest in our buildings in the best way that staff saw based on our long-term accommodation plan. We don't have that ability now. We do have to go through the ministry to make those requests, and they're not always approved, I would say. And certainly I can't recall the last time we've got approval to use it for construction, if ever.
Thank you. I'll cede the chair back.
Thank you, sir. Before we go to round two, any trustees that have any questions? Hearing none. Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a twig for me when Trustee Patel talked about OPSPA. The other thing we can put into our communication is the FAO, the watchdog report from December of 2024, which stated that Ontario has a 12.7 billion shortfall on school repair and construction. That's the provincial watchdog. It said the Financial Accountability Office itself's report. And in that report, just for Trustee Patel and for everyone else, OPSPA is quoted in a statement that schools are critical public infrastructure and governments must invest properly in them. Quote, just like the government is significantly invested in the growth and maintenance of highways and residential infrastructure to support Ontario's economy, so too must it invest in school growth and maintenance, the association wrote. And there's also details in here with a provincial perspective. The other thing that this FAO noted is, like the Auditor General's report, and then, so that's been mentioned before by our director, that maybe receiving this information in writing was part of because that was part of recommendation number 15 in the Auditor General's report. When it had about capital, the third part there was provide school boards with detailed written feedback, a debrief on funding decisions to help them understand why projects were or were not approved. But there are other 2 points that the Auditor General raised in recommendation 15 to the Minister of Education, and that was for them to develop and implement a formal, quantifiable evaluation process used for scoring all criteria used by the ministry to rank capital project business case submissions. We have not seen that. And the document its rationale for funding decisions on school boards' capital projects. And we have not seen that for across the board. Staff has received our own information, but we haven't seen the information of others. So I think as part of a potential letter to the ministry, we should remind them of the Auditor General's response and the FAO response, because This is not just us saying things. This is us reporting factual information that has come through in a couple of instances. And then the last thing really is about the point that, you know, between the Toronto Catholic District School Board and the Toronto Public District School Board, it's 20% of the population of students in the province. We alone have 12%. We get to apply for the same 5 capital projects as every single other board. Some of those boards applied for 5 capital projects and got 3 approved. And I think the absurdity of that, it is not equitable in any sense of the word equitable. Maybe equal, but it's certainly not equitable. And I think that's a point that should be raised time and time again in flashing neon lights, because it's simply not fair to the students in Toronto. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. And we'll put Trustee Earhart.
Oh, thank you very much. I just wanted to say I fully agree with Trustee Laskin's comments, and also wanted to note that my understanding is that those recommendations that were just articulated are also things that OBSPA has reiterated. And so I did want to say that I think there is a role for OBSPA, not insofar as like the Toronto perspective, but the provincial perspective around transparency and accountability around this decision-making process. And it is something that they've reiterated on previous advocacy days, and just that I see a role there. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. And I'm going to pass the chair to Trustee Didivitis.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. The moratorium exemption and the possibility of this new avenue that we're talking about potentially trying to explore. Have we approached ministry staff to ask if there's a roadmap to how they consider or how they would like I want to explore every opportunity possible that would allow us to do this. But I'm also a little worried that we're going to make this, you know, great make work project for staff that the ministry's not going to agree to look at. So if through our conversations with them, have they agreed that there's a new mechanism to do this and a roadmap, so to speak, or how many they'll entertain in a specific calendar year or 60 days, 90 days, you know, when we can do this? Are there any parameters at all or that around any potential likelihood that this would be successful?
Through the chair, we have continued to have conversations with staff about the needs and you know, the smaller schools that we have. We have schools where there is a K-5 school and a K-8 school, where the K-5 is a feeder school to the K-8. And if we combine the two of them, we could fit them in the K-8 school. And to me, that one is something that I think if we were to have a conversation with the ministry and they were able to make an exception, that to me seems like one that has some potential. But the staff is certainly aware of the challenges that we're having. We will continue to look at if there are any other exceptions that we can think of that would be different than just we have excess capacity and we need to combine them in order to deal with not only programming needs in those areas. You know, when we have 3 schools that have 500 each versus a school that has 12 to 1,500 students, obviously we're going to be able to offer better programming in a larger school. So programming and the facility condition are two really strong reasons for combining the schools. But I'm not sure that those would rise to an exception level. So we do need to think about what's something specific that not every board is challenged with, that we would be able to potentially ask for an exception based on a very specific circumstance.
Okay, thank you. We've had this discussion in this horseshoe for an extended period of time about the number of cases we're allowed to make every year. And it's always, unfair that we represent. And traditionally, I've always found this to be a really challenging argument because they don't pick our number one picks. They don't pick any, there's no rhyme or reason. So the concept of having more never seemed to be that relevant to me. But I must admit, I'm changing my tune on this. The Trustee Laskin and others are winning me over on this because without any particular criteria that you're driving to, the opportunity to make great business cases that you have no idea how they're being scored, or the fact if we're going to just close our eyes, create a great business case and swing for the fences, I'd like more swings, as many swings as you'll let me take, because I don't know where it is how we're supposed to get to where we want to go. And until we get a list, I'd like to swing, more often. And I'll leave it and I'll close off just by sharing, staff presented the capital revitalization program, and it was, this was a really great conversation to have. And it was really interesting, a unique way for us to be able to deal with our challenges in a way that wasn't going to be adversely affecting the ministry and expecting them. It wasn't us sending them a Christmas list of, gee, we'd really like you to spend $100 billion and fix all our problems. This was about finding a way to let us deal with our challenges in a responsible manner that wouldn't have a financial burden on the province. So this seemed like, a really optimistic and practical way to proceed. But to be able to do that, we need to have the ability to lift the moratorium and to be able to do that work. It is really, I have had the pleasure to sit on TLC, and you get to see the talented people that are over there working with staff, creating on all these wonderful possibilities of what's possible and combinations with the Toronto Catholic Board and the city around what is possible to better serve the student, not only the students, but the residents of the city of Toronto, the taxpayers. And it's just incredibly disappointing to be continually, it doesn't matter how good the idea is, we can't get the ministry to get out of the way and let us constructively try to fix our challenges. I don't need them to bring their checkbook to the table necessarily all the time. Just get out of the way. Let us look at our situation constructively, creatively, make partnerships that work for students, that work for families, that work for residents and taxpayers, and let us, do the work that the taxpayer. We have our public meetings, and invariably someone tells you that they lose patience because all the governments are siloed. There's one taxpayer, one tax dollar, and there's an expectation that we're going to be able to spend that dollar effectively. And then yet we spend all our time in our silos trying to, find a way to get this done. And it's just incredibly challenging. And I'll get off my soapbox for now.
I'll cede the chair back, but I'll just let you know it's a good speech. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I think it was happiest part that I concluded. But okay, we're through the speakers list for the second time. There are no one others. This isn't because it was an oral update. We don't have there was no motion we don't need to approve it, but we are going to discuss a business arising motion that has arisen. And we have it. And we need a seconder for it. So if you could put it on the screen potentially, it might be easier to acquire a second. And while that's happening, Trustee DeVitis, would you want to take us through your motion, please?
Yeah, I kept it very open. I don't know the type of communications that we may want to do, a letter obviously, but there may be other type of responses. The chair communicated with me that he would want to go ahead with something like this, but obviously they're not here right now. And this would give an opportunity for colleagues to know that this is coming, right? Because the only thing we have, if they weren't at the meeting today, is a description of the oral report. And this will give us an opportunity to have a further discussion at board. And in the meantime, I'm assuming that we're going to be able to get probably unanimous approval for us to be able to communicate with the ministry. Staff and the chair can start to think about how it is and that they may be able to respond. And there were a number of ideas that were thrown about today already. And so without wanting to sort of bottle us in too far, I wanted to have an opportunity for us to move something today that gave us a little bit of direction.
Okay, thank you. And before we open it up for discussion, I do require a seconder for the motion.
I can second it.
I'll second. Oh, yeah.
Okay, Trustee Patel, I think got in first. So Trustee Patel will be second. Seconder, Trustee Patel, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. We will set up a speakers list. Trustee Laskin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just might recommend the word report to be changed to announcement because it wasn't a report. They just made an announcement. Thank you very much for consideration.
Yeah, that's a fair adjustment.
Thank you. And you're done? Thank you. I have a question, and I don't believe I can pass the chair to Trustee DeVitis because he's moving it. So Trustee Earhart, will you accept the chair?
Yes, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Can I suggest to the mover and the seconder that because we are expecting an increased level of citizen awareness and involvement, that we put a timeline on this that might, so that the report might be able to be fast-tracked so that it could be dealt with in this period of heightened engagement?
Through the chair, happy to consider that if you have any wording for that. The vaguer it is, to be honest, at this stage, the easier it is for the chair and the director to act on it. But how would you like to frame it?
Okay, well, then maybe I'll pivot then and ask the interim director and potentially the chair of the board, Chair Shen, if you think it would be conceivable that we could draft this in time to be presented at board on February 19th. Is that a timeline that's doable? I'm getting nods of the heads, I think, from.
Through the chair, yes, we can prioritize this.
Chair Shan, do you have a challenge? Sorry. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, he did say he thought he would have to step away. So I guess I would like a friendly amendment to include the report or work to a potential goal of the report being ready for board on, no, we don't like that. Chair Laskin, I sense that you can help me with my dilemma.
Simplify that the chair of the board and the director communicate develop a communication in response to the Ministry of Education's capital priorities report in time for the board meeting on blah, blah, blah. Like, we don't want them to present a plan at the board. We want them to actually have a communication that's ready to go, in my opinion, was the intent. Because
Ideally, yeah.
by the time you'd have a plan and then approve a plan and then have to approve something else, the election's over.
So if I can
Thanks
make
very
the,
much, Trustee Laskin. I'm going to try to just to facilitate in case there are others, just I'll keep a speakers list on this right now. And thanks very much. I heard that Trustee Ditavides wanted to go next. If there's anyone else, just Mandrika will keep a quick list to flag to me. Thank you.
thank you, Trustee Earhart. I appreciate you putting some order in the conversation. So if we can make the change after priorities, so striking report, because we're saying it's an announcement. So then it reads, a response to the Ministry of Education's capital priorities announcement in time for the following board meeting.
Thanks very much, Trustee Ditavides. Chair McLean, can I hand the chair back to you as I have a comment on this?
If my amendment is friendly, can I resume the chair? Because we didn't go through, I'm just the mechanics.
Oh, yes. Can we acknowledge that this is a friendly amendment for the mover, Trustee Ditavides, and the seconder, Trustee Patel?
It is
That
for
what
me.
we see now? Thank you, Trustee Patel.
I'm good.
Thanks very much. And so may I hand the chair back over to you, Trustee Chair McLean, for me to make a small comment on this?
Yeah, I'm told that's permissible, and because, yeah, please, Chair. Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to suggest, but it's fully at others' discretion, in time for the next full board meeting rather than the regular meeting on February 19th, in case we have the opportunity to meet sooner as a full board for any reason. This is our next scheduled board meeting, but in the event we had any other business to discuss and we're able to meet sooner, I would support that this be brought forward for what it's worth if we had a special meeting. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just looking when P and P is.
Doesn't matter. It's left to be-
P and P is the 12th. Yeah, I think we're going to unless they tell us that it's ready, but I think we'll assume the 19th. And Chair Shan isn't here to ask, so it's a little awkward to try to commit him to such a quick timeline. So, okay, so is there any other speakers that want to speak to this motion? Trustee Ditavides, do you want to close?
No, we can go ahead.
Thank you. Can we open the vote, please?
Trustee Earhart, heartily in favor.
We'll count that twice then.
Trustee Patel in favor.
The Davides in favor?
Trustee Wong in favor.
Trustee McLean in favor.
Trustee Rajwani in favor.
Yeah, will please mark Trustee Shan absent. Trustee Wong was in favor. And that passes 6-0. So thank you. And now the last item on the agenda is adjournment. I want to thank trustees and staff for making this a productive meeting. I need a mover and seconder to move adjournment. Trustee Ditavides.
Trustee Patel.
I think I heard Trustee Patel. Trustee Patel will second. Any opposed? Hearing none, that passes. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.